Chapter 3 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. In the beginning, there was a great surge. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Albert Einstein. Irritating facts. It was 1916, and Albert Einstein didn't like where his calculations were leading him. If his theory of general relativity was true, it meant that the universe was not eternal, but had a beginning. Einstein's calculations indeed were revealing a definite beginning to all time, all matter, and all space. This flew in the face of his belief that the universe was static and eternal. Einstein later called his discovery irritating. He wanted the universe to be self existent, not reliant on any outside cause. But the universe appeared to be one giant effect. In fact, Einstein so disliked the implications of general relativity, a theory that is now proven accurate to 5 decimal places, that he introduced a cosmological constant, which some have since called a fudge factor, into his equations in order to show that the universe is static and to avoid an absolute beginning. But Einstein's fudge factor didn't fudge for long. In 1919, British cosmologist Arthur Eddington conducted an experiment during a solar eclipse which confirmed that general relativity was indeed true. The universe wasn't static but had a beginning. Like Einstein, Eddington wasn't happy with the implications. He later wrote, philosophically, the notion of a beginning of the present order of nature is repugnant to me. I should like to find a genuine loophole. By 1922, Russian mathematician Alexander Friedmann had officially exposed Einstein's fudge factor as an algebraic error. Incredibly, in his quest to avoid a beginning, the great Einstein had divided by zero, something even schoolchildren know is a no-no. Meanwhile, Dutch astronomer William de Sitter had found that general relativity required the universe to be expanding, and in 1927 the expanding of the universe was actually observed by astronomer Edwin Hubble, namesake of the Space Telescope. Looking through the 100-inch telescope at California's Mount Wilson Observatory, Hubble discovered a red shift in the light from every observable galaxy, which meant that those galaxies were moving away from us. In other words, general relativity was again confirmed. The universe appears to be expanding from a single point in the distant past. In 1929, Einstein made a pilgrimage to Mount Wilson to look through Hubble's telescope for himself. What he saw was irrefutable. The observational evidence showed that the universe was indeed expanding as general relativity had predicted. With this cosmological constant now completely crushed by the weight of the evidence against it, Einstein could no longer support his wish for an eternal universe. He subsequently described the cosmological constant as the greatest blunder of my life, and he redirected his efforts to find the box top to the puzzle of life. Einstein said that he wanted to know how God created the world. I am not interested in this or that phenomenon, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thought. The best are details. Although Einstein said he believed in a pantheistic God, a God that is the universe, his comments admitting creation and a divine thought better describe a theistic God. And as irritating as it may be, his theory of general relativity stands today as one of the strongest lines of evidence for a theistic God. Indeed, general relativity supports what is one of the oldest formal arguments for the existence of a theistic God, the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument, the beginning of the end for atheism. Don't be put off by the technical sounding name cosmological, comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. That is, the cosmological argument is the argument from the beginning of the universe. If the universe had a beginning, then the universe had a cause. In logical form, the argument goes like this: 1. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. 2. The universe had a beginning. 3. Therefore, the universe had a cause. As we showed in the last chapter, for an argument to be true, it has to be logically valid, and its premises must be true. This is a valid argument, but are the premises true? Let's take a look at the premises. Premise 1. Everything that had a beginning had a cause, is the law of causality, which is the fundamental principle of science. Without the law of causality, science is impossible. In fact, Francis Bacon, the father of modern science, said, "True knowledge is knowledge by causes." In other words, science is a search for causes. That's what scientists do. They try to discover what caused what. If there's one thing we've observed about the universe, it's that things don't happen without a cause. When a man is driving down the street, a car never appears in front of his car out of nowhere with no driver or no cause. We know many a police officer has heard this, but it's just not true. There's always a driver or some other cause behind that car appearing. Even the great skeptic David Hume could not deny the law of causality. He wrote, "I never asserted so absurd a proposition as that something could arise without a cause." In fact, to deny the law of causality is to deny rationality. The very process of rational thinking requires us to put together thoughts, the causes, that result in conclusions, the effects. So if anyone ever tells you he doesn't believe in the law of causality, simply ask that person, what caused you to come to that conclusion? Since the law of causality is well established and undeniable, premise 1 is true. What about premise 2? Did the universe have a beginning? If not, then no cause was needed. If so, then the universe must have had a cause. Until about the time of Einstein, atheists could comfort themselves with the belief that the universe is eternal and thus did not need a cause. But since then, 5 lines of scientific evidence have been discovered that prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the universe did indeed have a beginning. And that beginning was what scientists now call the Big Bang. The Big Bang evidence can be easily remembered by the acronym SURGE, SURGE. In the beginning, there was a great surge. Every several years or so, the major news magazines, Time, Newsweek, and the like, run a cover story about the origin and fate of the universe. When did the universe begin, and when will it end? Are two of the questions investigated in such articles. The fact that the universe had a beginning and will ultimately die is not even up for debate in these reports. Why? Because modern scientists now know that a beginning and an ending are demanded by one of the most validated laws in all of nature, the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics is the S in our SURGE acronym. Thermodynamics is the study of matter and energy, and the second law states, among other things, that the universe is running out of usable energy. With each passing moment, the amount of usable energy in the universe grows smaller, leading scientists to the obvious conclusion that one day all the energy will be gone and the universe will die. Like a running car, the universe will ultimately run out of gas. You say, so what? How does that prove that the universe had a beginning? Well, look at it this way. The first law of thermodynamics states that the total amount of energy in the universe is constant. In other words, the universe has only a finite amount of energy, much as your car has only a finite amount of gas. Now, if your car has only a finite amount of gas, the first law, and whenever it's running, it continually consumes gas, the second law, would your car be running right now if you had started it up an infinitely long time ago? No, of course not. It would be out of gas by now. In the same way, the universe would be out of energy by now if it had been running from all eternity. But here we are. The lights are still on. So the universe must have begun sometime in the finite past. That is, the universe is not eternal. It has a beginning. A flashlight is another way to think about the universe. If you leave a flashlight on overnight, what's the intensity of the light in the morning? It is dim because the batteries have used up most of their energy. Well, the universe is like a dying flashlight. It only has so much energy left to consume. But since the universe still has some battery life left, it's not quite dead yet, it can't be eternal. It must have had a beginning. For if it were eternal, the battery would have died by now. The second law is also known as the law of entropy, which is a fancy way of saying that nature tends to bring things to disorder. That is, with time, things naturally fall apart. Your car falls apart, your house falls apart, your body falls apart. In fact, the second law is the reason many of us get dresser disease when we get older. Our chest falls into our drawers. But if the universe is becoming less ordered, then where did the original order come from? Astronomer Robert Jastrow likens the universe to a wound up clock. If a wind up clock is running down, then someone must have wound it up. The aspect of the second law also tells us that the universe had a beginning. Since we still have some order left, just like we still have some usable energy left, the universe cannot be eternal, because if it were, we would have reached complete disorder, entropy, by now. A number of years ago, a student from a Christian ministry on an Ivy League campus invited me, Norm, to speak there on a related topic. During the lecture, I basically told the students what we've written here, but in a lot more detail. After the lecture, the student who had invited me there asked me to have lunch with him and his physics professor. As we sat down to eat, the professor made it clear that he was skeptical of my argument that the second law requires a beginning for the universe. In fact, he said he was a materialist who believed that only material exists and that it has existed from all eternity. If matter is eternal, what do you do with the second law? I asked him. He replied, "Every law has an exception. This is my exception." I could have countered by asking him if it's really good science to assume that every law has an exception. That doesn't seem very scientific and may even be self defeating. It may be self defeating when you ask, does the law that every law has an exception have an exception? If it does, maybe the second law is the exception to the law that every law must have an exception. I didn't go down that road because I thought he would take an exception. Instead, I backed off the second law for a moment and decided to question him about materialism. If everything is material, I asked, then what is a scientific theory? After all, the theory about everything being material isn't material. It's not made out of molecules. Without a moment's hesitation, he quipped, "A theory is magic." Magic? I repeated, not really believing what I was hearing. "What's your basis for saying that?" "Faith," he quickly replied. "Faith in magic?" I thought to myself. I can't believe what I'm hearing. If faith in magic is the best the materialists have to offer, then I don't have enough faith to be a materialist. In retrospect, it seemed to me that the professor had a brief moment of complete candor. He knew he couldn't answer the overwhelming evidence in support of the second law, so he admitted that his position had no basis in evidence or good reason. In doing so, he provided another example of the will refusing to believe what the mind knows to be true, and how the atheist view is based on sheer faith. The professor was right about one thing: having faith. In fact, he needed a leap of faith to willingly ignore the most established law in all of nature. That's how Arthur Eddington characterized the second law more than 80 years ago. The law that head entropy increases, the second law of thermodynamics, holds, I think, the supreme position among the laws of nature. If someone points out to you that your pet theory of the universe is in disagreement with Maxwell's equations, then so much for Maxwell's equations. It is found to be contradicted by observation. Well, these experiments do bungle things sometimes, but if your theory is found to be against the second law of thermodynamics, I can give you no hope. There is nothing for it but to collapse in deepest humiliation. Since I could see that the professor was not really interested in accepting the truth, I didn't ask him any more potentially humiliating questions. But since we couldn't ignore the power of the second law on our own bodies, we both ordered dessert. Neither of us was willing to deny that we needed to replace the energy we had just used up. The universe is expanding. Good scientific theories are those that are able to predict phenomena that have not yet been observed. As we have seen, general relativity predicted an expanding universe, but it wasn't until legendary astronomer Edwin Hubble looked through his telescope more than a decade later that scientists finally confirmed that the universe is expanding and that it's expanding from a single point. Astronomer Vesto Melvin Silfer was hot on the trail of his expanding universe as early as 1913, but it was Hubble who put all the pieces together in the late 20s. This expanding universe is the second line of scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. How does the expanding universe prove a beginning? Think about it this way. If we could watch a video recording of the history of the universe in reverse, we would see all matter in the universe collapse back to a point, not the size of a basketball, not the size of a golf ball, not even the size of a pinhead, but mathematically and logically to a point that is actually nothing. In other words, once there was nothing and then bang, there was something. The entire universe exploded into being. This, of course, is what is commonly called the Big Bang. It's important to understand that the universe is not expanding into empty space, but space itself is expanding. There was no space before the Big Bang. It's also important to understand that the universe did not emerge from existing material, but from nothing. There was no matter before the Big Bang. In fact, chronologically, there was no before the Big Bang because there are no befores without time, and there was no time until the Big Bang. Time, space, and matter came into existence at the Big Bang. These facts gives atheists a lot of trouble, as they did on a rainy night in Georgia in April of 1998. That night, I, Frank, attended a debate in Atlanta on the question, Does God exist? William Lane Craig took the affirmative position, and Peter Atkins took the negative position. The debate was highly spirited and even humorous at times, partially due to the moderator, William F. Buckley Jr. Buckley did not hide his favoritism for Craig's pro God position. After introducing Craig and his impressive credentials, Buckley began to introduce Atkins by cracking, On the side of the devil is Dr. Peter Atkins. One of Craig's 5 arguments for the existing of God was the cosmological argument, as supported by the Big Bang evidence we've been discussing here. He pointed out that the universe, all time, all matter, and all space exploded out of nothing, a fact that Atkins had conceded in his book and reaffirmed later in the debate that night. Since Craig spoke first, he informed the audience how Atkins attempts to explain the universe from an atheistic perspective. In his book, The Creation Revisited, Dr. Atkins struggles mightily to explain how the universe could come into existence, uncaused out of nothing, but in the end, he finds himself trapped in self contradiction. He writes, Now we go back in time beyond the moment of creation to when there was no time and to where there was no space. At this time before time, he imagines a swirling dust of mathematical points which recombine again and again and again and finally come by trial and error to form our space-time universe. Craig went on to point out that Atkins' position is not a scientific theory, but is actually self-contradictory, pop metaphysics. It is pop metaphysics because it's a made-up explanation. There's absolutely no scientific evidence supporting it. And it's self-contradictory because it assumes time and space before there was time and space. Since Craig did not get a chance to dialogue with Atkins directly on this point, a colleague and I stood in the question line near the end of the debate to ask Atkins about his position. Unfortunately, time expired before either of us could ask a question, so we approached Atkins backstage afterwards. Dr. Atkins, my colleague started, you admit that the universe exploded out of nothing, but your explanation for the beginning equivocates on what nothing is. Swirling mathematical points are not nothing. Even they are something. How do you justify this? Instead of addressing the issue, Atkins verbally succumbed to the second law of thermodynamics. He said, Look, gentlemen, I'm very tired. I can't answer any more questions now. In other words, his decrease of energy proved the second law was at work. Atkins literally had nothing to say. Well, according to the modern cosmological evidence, the universe literally had nothing from which to emerge. Yet when it came to giving an atheistic explanation for this, Atkins didn't really begin with nothing, but with mathematical points of time. Of course, one can't imagine how mere mathematical points and time could actually cause the universe anyway. Nevertheless, we wanted to press the fact that atheists like Atkins must be able to explain how the universe began from absolutely nothing. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition. He said that nothing is what rocks dream about. The nothing from which the universe emerged is not mathematical points, as Atkins suggested, or positive and negative energy, as Isaac Asimov, who is an atheist, once wrote. Nothing is literally no thing what rocks dream about. British author Anthony Kenny honestly described his own predicament as an atheist in light of evidence for the Big Bang. He wrote, "According to the Big Bang theory, the whole matter of the universe began to exist at a particular time in the remote past. A proponent of such a theory, at least if he is an atheist, must believe that the matter of the universe came from nothing and by nothing."